Have you ever met someone who never gives up, no matter how tough things get? Imagine a person struggling to speak English, but refusing to switch back to his native language. Today, we bring you the inspiring story of Sergius, a man who made English his habit. But will he succeed or will he give up when things get hard? Let's find out. Welcome to English Tone. This channel is all about learning English through interesting and inspiring stories. If you want to improve your English in a fun way, then you are in the right place. Let's begin today's story. English in English is my habit. Sergius had always admired people who spoke English fluently. Every time he watched an English movie or listened to a speech, he wished he could express himself just as smoothly. But reality was different. Every time he tried speaking English, the words didn't come out right. His tongue twisted. His pronunciation was awkward, and worst of all, he made grammar mistakes. People would stare at him, some with amusement, others with pity. His friends chuckled when he struggled to find the right words. Strangers corrected him when he mispronounced simple phrases. The embarrassment felt like a heavy stone on his chest, but Sergius wasn't the kind to give up. It wasn't that he didn't try. He had spent countless hours memorizing English words. He had read English books, watched tutorials, and even written in a diary every night. But speaking? That was a different challenge. Speaking English in front of others made him feel exposed. It was as if every mistake he made was an open invitation for people to laugh at him, and they did. One evening, after a particularly humiliating day at college, Sergius sat in his small room, staring at his reflection in the mirror. That day, his professor had asked him to answer a simple question in English. But the moment he opened his mouth, his mind went blank. The class erupted in laughter, and the professor sighed in disappointment. That was it. The final straw. Sergius clenched his fists. "Enough is enough," he whispered to himself. "I am done feeling ashamed. I am done avoiding English. I am done running away." He took a deep breath and made a decision that would change his life forever. From today, I will only speak English, no matter what. No matter how many mistakes I make, no matter how much people laugh at me. English in English is my habit now. The decision wasn't easy, but he felt a strange sense of freedom. He knew he would face challenges. He knew he would struggle. But for the first time, he didn't care. His journey had begun. The very next day, he woke up early and stood in front of his mirror. "Good morning, Sergius. Today is a new day," he said in English, smiling at his reflection. It felt unnatural, but he kept going. As he walked out of his house, he promised himself, "I will not speak in my native language today, no matter what." The real challenge, however, was about to begin. Sergius had barely begun his journey when he faced his first real test. The morning air was crisp, and the streets were alive with the usual sounds of vendors calling out their wares, children laughing on their way to school, and old men sitting on benches engaged in their daily gossip. But none of this distracted Sergius. His mind was set on one goal, speaking English no matter what. He was practicing quietly to himself as he walked, repeating simple phrases under his breath. "I am walking to the bookstore. I need to buy a new notebook. The sun is bright today." It felt strange, but he reminded himself that it was all part of the habit he was building. As he turned the corner, he saw a familiar face. Bluntschli was the kind of person who commanded attention without trying. He walked with confidence, spoke with clarity, and most importantly, he spoke English fluently. He had studied abroad and had an effortless way of switching between languages. Sergius had always admired him from a distance, but had never dared to have a full conversation with him. Bluntschli noticed Sergius first and waved. "Hey, Sergius, where are you off to?" Sergius hesitated for a second. The old him would have replied in his native language, but not today. He cleared his throat and forced himself to respond. I am going, to bookshop?" Bluntschli raised an eyebrow but smiled. "The bookstore, you mean?" Sergius nodded. "Yes, bookstore." There was a brief silence. Sergius could already feel the heat rising in his cheeks. His words felt heavy and slow, but he had said them. He hadn't backed down. That was a victory. Bluntschli, being the sharp observer he was, tilted his head and asked, "You're really trying to speak only in English, aren't you?" Sergius straightened his posture, forcing himself to meet Bluntschli's gaze. "Yes, I have, made habit. English in English. My habit." Bluntschli chuckled, not in a mocking way, but with genuine amusement. "That's interesting. But why? Why force yourself when you could just take it slow?" Sergius took a deep breath. He had been waiting for someone to ask this question. "Because habits make us who we are. If I practice every day, I will improve." Bluntschli looked at him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smirked. "All right, if you're that serious, let's test your dedication." Sergius frowned. "Test?" Bluntschli folded his arms. "Yes, from this moment we will talk only in English for an entire week. No switching to your native language, no matter how tough it gets. If you give up, you lose." Sergius's heart pounded. He had already decided to stick to English, but having someone else actively testing him made it feel more real, more serious. Still, he met Bluntschli's challenge with a firm nod. "I accept." Bluntschli extended a hand. "Good. Then let's begin." Sergius shook his hand, knowing that the real struggle was about to start. And so, the challenge began. The first day was a disaster. Every time Sergius opened his mouth, he found himself struggling to find words. He had the thoughts in his head, but when he tried to speak, nothing came out right. His sentences were broken, his vocabulary was limited, and sometimes he simply didn't know what to say at all. Bluntschli, true to his word, spoke only in English. He corrected Sergius occasionally, but didn't slow down his pace. If Sergius didn't understand something, he had to figure it out. By the evening, Sergius was exhausted. He had never felt so mentally drained in his life. Speaking a foreign language all day was like lifting heavy weights. His brain ached. "You look tired," Bluntschli remarked as they sat on a bench after classes. Sergius sighed. "Yes, I am. Very tired. Head is pain." Bluntschli chuckled. "You mean I have a headache?" Sergius nodded. "Yes, headache." Bluntschli leaned back. "You can still quit, you know. No one is forcing you to do this." Sergius straightened up immediately. "No, I not give up." He caught his mistake and corrected himself. "I will not give up," Bluntschli smiled. "Good. Let's see if you can keep up tomorrow." The days that followed were even harder. Sergius found himself in frustrating situations, ordering food at a cafe and forgetting the word for spoon, trying to explain a concept in class and getting stuck halfway, struggling to tell a joke, only to mess up the punchline. People stared at him when he spoke, some with curiosity, others with impatience. His friends were confused. "Why are you doing this to yourself?" they asked. But Sergius didn't listen. Every time he felt embarrassed, he reminded himself, "This is my habit now. English in English. I will not stop." By the fourth day, something incredible happened. Sergius found himself thinking in English. Not all the time, not perfectly, but there were moments when words came naturally. He didn't have to translate everything in his head before speaking. His sentences, though simple, were coming out more smoothly. Bluntschli noticed. "You're getting better," he admitted, watching as Sergius confidently ordered a cup of coffee, without hesitation. Sergius grinned. "I told you! English in English is my habit now." Bluntschli laughed. "All right. Let's see if you can last the whole week." Sergius nodded. He was ready. He was improving. He just had to keep going. The first morning of Sergius's challenge felt different. He had spent the whole night thinking about how he would survive the day. Speaking English fluently had always been a dream, but now that he had made it a rule for himself, reality struck hard. The moment he stepped out of bed, he reminded himself, "English in English is my habit now, no matter what." As he got dressed, he started practicing in his head. He tried forming sentences about his morning routine. "I wear my shirt. I am wearing my shirt." He paused, shaking his head. "No, it should be, I am getting dressed." This was harder than he thought. At breakfast, his younger sister asked him a question in their native language. Instinctively, he opened his mouth to reply, but stopped himself just in time. His mother raised an eyebrow. "Why are you silent?" she asked, confused. Sergius cleared his throat. He had to answer in English. I eat food. Now." His sister burst out laughing. "You mean I am eating my breakfast, right?" she corrected. Sergius sighed. "Yes, that is what I say. I mean, that is what I am saying." His mother chuckled but shook her head. "Sergius, why are you making things difficult for yourself?" "I must do this. English in English is my habit now," he said with determination. After breakfast, he met Bluntschli outside. His friend had a smug smile on his face. "Ready for the challenge?" Bluntschli asked in perfect English. Sergius nodded. "Yes, I am ready." Bluntschli smirked. "Let's see how long that confidence lasts." The first challenge came when they entered a small tea shop. The waiter approached them, waiting for their order. "What do you want?" the waiter asked in their native language. Sergius hesitated. He knew the words in English, but his brain seemed to freeze under pressure. Bluntschli watched him with crossed arms, clearly enjoying the struggle. Yes, I want chai. No, wait, tea. I want a tea." Bluntschli burst into laughter. "You mean I would like a cup of tea?" Sergius felt heat rise to his face. "Yes, that is what I mean," he muttered. The waiter smirked and walked away. "This is going to be a long week for you, my friend," Bluntschli said, shaking his head, and he was right. Throughout the day, Sergius faced humiliation after humiliation. He wanted to speak fluently, but his words came out in broken pieces. Every sentence felt like a puzzle, and he was missing too many pieces. At university, his classmates were confused when he suddenly started speaking only in English. "Why are you doing this?" one of them asked in their language. Sergius smiled. "Because I want to learn. I will not stop." But it was not easy. During a class discussion, the professor asked him a question about a historical event. Normally, he would have answered quickly in his own language, but now he had to do it in English. Sergius cleared his throat. In the past, there was a war, and, people fighted. The professor frowned. You mean fought? Sergius nodded quickly. Yes, that. The class snickered. Someone whispered, He sounds like a child. The words stung, but Sergius reminded himself, This is just the beginning. I will not stop. By the evening, his brain felt exhausted. He had never concentrated so much in his life. Every sentence took effort. Every conversation felt like a battle. His native language felt like a tempting escape, but he refused to give in. At dinner, his father noticed his struggle. You're quiet today, he said in their language. Sergius forced a smile. I'm tired. A lot talking. I talked a lot. His father nodded but looked concerned. Son, are you sure about this? You don't have to do this to yourself. Sergius straightened. No, I must. English is my habit now. The next few days were no different. His struggles continued. He found himself stopping mid-sentence, searching for words, making mistakes, and facing amused looks from those around him. But something strange started happening by the fourth day. A classmate asked him a question, and without thinking, Sergius replied in English correctly. For a second, he didn't even realize what he had done. Bluntschli, who had been observing his progress, smiled. See? You are improving. Sergius blinked. Really? I didn't even think before speaking. Bluntschli nodded. That's because your mind is getting used to English. It is becoming natural for you. Sergius felt a spark of excitement. Maybe, just maybe, this challenge wasn't impossible after all, but he wasn't ready to celebrate yet. The week wasn't over. There were still 3 days left, and he knew one thing. He had to keep pushing himself if he truly wanted to master English, because soon something was about to change in a way he never expected. By the 4th day, something incredible began to happen. It wasn't like a sudden flash of light or a miraculous event, but Sergius could feel the shift deep inside himself. His struggle, his persistence, and his belief in the process were beginning to pay off, albeit slowly. English, which had once seemed like an impossible mountain to climb, was no longer as intimidating. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by every sentence, he was starting to see progress, piece by piece, day by day. It began during breakfast on the 4th day. Sergius had just finished his meal when he noticed a familiar friend approaching him with a wide grin. It was Bluntschli. He had been supportive, but also skeptical of Sergius's commitment. Bluntschli had watched as Sergius struggled for the past few days, but this time was different. He approached Sergius with a more curious expression than before. How's the English challenge going, Sergius? Bluntschli asked, his tone light but with a hint of seriousness. Sergius smiled back, feeling a rush of confidence. He had been practicing all morning, speaking to himself and even reading a new book in English. He replied to Bluntschli without hesitation. It's going well. I think I'm getting better. Bluntschli raised an eyebrow. Oh? You think so? I've been hearing you speak English all week, and it's been interesting. Sergius couldn't help but laugh nervously. I know, but today feels different. Bluntschli leaned in closer. His curiosity piqued. What do you mean by different? Well, today I'm thinking in English. When I speak, the words don't feel like they're just coming from my mouth. They feel natural. I'm even starting to correct myself when I make mistakes. Bluntschli seemed taken aback, but then he nodded thoughtfully. Wow, you're actually improving. I can tell you've been working hard, but this is a huge step. You're starting to think in English. That's what makes it feel real." Sergius felt a surge of pride. The weight that had once pressed heavily on his chest now seemed lighter, like the air he breathed was fresher. For the first time, he wasn't just trying to speak English because he felt he had to. He was living in it. His thoughts, his reflections, his emotions, all were happening in English, as though the language had become a natural part of his life. The day went on, and Sergius felt this new sensation grow stronger. While walking to his class, he found himself mentally narrating the world around him in English. "The trees are green," he thought, observing the vibrant colors of nature. "The sky is clear, and the air is cool today." It felt strange, but it also felt right. As he sat down in class, he noticed something else. When the professor asked a question, Sergius didn't hesitate. His hand shot up before anyone else's. When it was his turn to answer, he spoke without the usual stutter, without second-guessing himself. The sentence was a little rough, but it was clear. The classmates who had once laughed at his mistakes now looked at him with surprise. Bluntschli was sitting in the back of the class, watching with a proud smile on his face. After class, Sergius walked out into the courtyard, his mind buzzing with excitement. He found a quiet bench to sit on, and for the first time he didn't feel the need to look over his shoulder. He spoke to himself out loud in English, narrating his thoughts and feelings. "Today was a good day," he said, staring at his shoes as he swung his legs back and forth. "I made it through the day without anyone pointing out my mistakes. The thought of correcting his own mistakes was a breakthrough in itself. In the past, if he had made an error, it would have made him stop in his tracks, unsure whether to continue or give up. But now, he noticed his mistakes almost immediately, and instead of feeling embarrassed, he simply fixed them and carried on. It was as if the language had become part of his identity. But there was something even more exciting about the change. It wasn't just about speaking English better or making fewer mistakes. It was about how he felt. For the first time, Sergius felt in control. He wasn't trying to force himself to speak. He was letting the language flow naturally, as if it were part of him. He was no longer afraid to speak or make mistakes. Later that evening, Sergius sat with his journal. The habit of writing every day had now become second nature. He no longer felt like he was translating his thoughts from his native language into English. The words came easily, and the sentences felt smooth, as though they were being formed directly in English, not as an afterthought. "I think I am starting to become more confident in English," he wrote. "I don't feel so afraid anymore. English is not just a language I speak, it's a part of me." The next morning, Sergius woke up earlier than usual. He felt like he had energy he hadn't had before. His resolve to speak English, to make it his habit, was stronger than ever. It was no longer something he was doing because he had to or because others expected him to. It was something he did because he truly enjoyed it now. He was excited about the language, excited about the opportunities it would open for him. Bluntschli had been right. Thinking in English was the key. As Sergius spoke to Bluntschli later that day, he noticed how much easier it was to express himself. He no longer needed to search for words or wonder if they were correct. His sentences were more fluid, more natural and more confident. "Bluntschli," Sergius said with a smile, "I think I'm starting to get the hang of it. English is becoming a part of me." Bluntschli nodded approvingly. "I can see that. Keep it up." but don't stop now. There's more ahead. Sergius's heart swelled with pride, but deep down he knew Bluntschli was right. This was just the beginning. There was more to learn, more to improve. He hadn't reached perfection, but he was closer than ever. He had made it through the hardest part, his fear. Now it was about refining his skills, pushing forward, and continuing the journey without looking back. As the days went by, Sergius never stopped practicing. He kept reading, listening, speaking, and, most importantly, thinking in English. It was his habit now, a habit he knew he would never let go. But there was still one more challenge waiting for him, one that would test everything he had learned so far. Sergius could hardly believe it. It had been an entire week, a whole 7 days of speaking only in English. At the beginning of this challenge, it had felt like an impossible task. There were moments when he wanted to give up, when the words seemed to escape him at the most crucial moments. There were times when his mind froze, when he had to search for words that simply wouldn't come. But now, as he stood in front of Bluntschli, he felt a surge of pride. That week had been a roller coaster of emotions. On the one hand, it had been incredibly frustrating. Every day had come with its own set of challenges. At first, he struggled to speak even the simplest sentences. He would make mistakes in every conversation, and the fear of sounding foolish always lingered in the back of his mind. But despite that, Sergius refused to speak in his native language. He had made a vow to himself, and he was determined to keep it. He remembered the first day vividly. Bluntschli had given him the challenge to speak only English for an entire week. Sergius had hesitated at first, not because he didn't want to, but because he wasn't sure if he could. The fear of failing, of making more mistakes, had almost stopped him, but he had taken a deep breath and accepted. "I'll do it," he had said to himself. The first few days were the hardest. Each time Sergius tried to speak, his thoughts seemed to scatter. He would fumble over words, forget the right verb tense, and get lost in the maze of English grammar. The most frustrating part was that every mistake felt like a loud echo in his mind, reminding him of how far he still had to go. But the moment he thought about giving up, something pushed him forward. It was as though a little voice inside him whispered, "You can do this. You have to do this." And so, he kept going. By the third day, Sergius noticed a small shift. His confidence began to grow, but it was a slow process. He no longer hesitated to speak, even when he knew he might make a mistake. He had learned to accept that mistakes were part of the learning process. His conversations were still full of errors, but they were fewer now. He found himself thinking in English, piecing together sentences more naturally. It was like learning to walk again, each step shaky at first, but eventually firm and steady. Bluntschli had been watching him closely throughout the week. At first he was skeptical. He wasn't sure if Sergius could keep up with the challenge, but as the days went on, he saw something in Sergius that made him believe in his potential. It wasn't just the improvement in his language skills. It was his determination, his refusal to quit. Bluntschli had seen many students give up on learning English, but Sergius was different. He was relentless. On the 5th day, Bluntschli had told Sergius, "You've come a long way. You're doing well, but don't get too comfortable. The real test is still to come." Sergius nodded. He didn't know what the real test would be, but he was ready. Nothing could make him stop now. The real test came on the 7th day. Sergius was sitting in the cafe going over his notes when Bluntschli approached him. Let's have a conversation, Bluntschli said with a smile. We'll talk about anything. Just keep it in English. Sergius felt a wave of nervousness wash over him, but he nodded. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. They began speaking, and for the first time, Sergius noticed something incredible. The words were flowing more easily than ever before. The sentences were coming together effortlessly. There was no hesitation, no searching for words. He was speaking English, and it felt natural. He was no longer focused on making mistakes. Instead, he was focused on the conversation itself. He could hear the words in his mind before they left his lips, and they sounded right. As they continued talking, Bluntschli asked him questions about his week, how he had felt, what had been difficult, and what he had learned. Sergius spoke openly about the struggles, the fears, and the doubts he had faced. He talked about the moments when he almost wanted to give up, but how something inside him had kept pushing him forward. He told Bluntschli about the sense of victory he felt, not just because he was speaking better English, but because he had learned to push through his fear. By the time the conversation ended, Sergius felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. He had done it. He had spoken English for an entire week without switching back to his native language. He had made mistakes, yes, but those mistakes had been part of his journey, part of his growth. And now, as he looked at Bluntschli, he saw a smile on his face. Bluntschli clapped him on the back. You win, Sergius. Your English has improved because you never gave up. You've done something many people can't. You should be proud. Sergius laughed, a wide grin spreading across his face. I told you, he said, his voice full of confidence. English in English is my habit now, and I will never stop. For the first time, Sergius truly believed in himself. It wasn't just about speaking English. It was about the person he had become. The week of struggle had shaped him, teaching him the value of perseverance and dedication. He had pushed through his fears, and now English was no longer a challenge. It was a part of his life, a part of who he was. As he walked away from Bluntschli, a sense of calm washed over him. He was no longer afraid to speak. The embarrassment, the self-doubt, the fear of making mistakes, all of it had been replaced by a quiet confidence. Speaking English was no longer something he had to force himself to do. It was something he wanted to do, something that had become second nature to him. But even as Sergius basked in the glow of his success, he knew the journey was not over. Learning was a lifelong process. There would be more challenges ahead, more mistakes to make, and more lessons to learn, but he was ready. He had proven to himself that he could do anything if he kept going, and now English would be his lifelong companion. As the days went by, Sergius continued to speak only English. It had become a habit, a part of his daily routine. His confidence grew, and his skills improved. But the most important change was within him. He no longer viewed English as a challenge to overcome. He viewed it as an opportunity to grow, to connect with others, and to express himself in a way he had never imagined possible. And so Sergius's journey continued, not just as someone learning a language, but as someone who had learned the power of perseverance, the importance of habits, and the value of never giving up. Sergius proved that learning English is not about being perfect. It's about making it a habit. If he can do it, so can you. So, will you start speaking English every day like Sergius? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, comment your thoughts, share with friends, subscribe to English Tone for more inspiring stories. See you in the next video.